What if every civilization in the universe vanished the moment it understood physics? Imagine a vast cosmos brimming with stars, planets, and the promise of life. And yet the instant any one of those civilizations pulled back the curtain of reality and glimpsed the inner machinery of nature, their time was already over. It would be as if the universe itself had written a silent contract. One clause hidden in fine print curiosity carries a death sentence. The quiet of the skies above us might not be the sound of emptiness at all, but the echo of billions of extinguished voices, each silenced the moment they touched the same dangerous flame. Picture this: somewhere far away on a planet orbiting a blue-white sun, a species much like ours once stood at the threshold of discovery. They deciphered equations, charted the stars-built machines that could probe the smallest particles of existence. For a brief instant they believed themselves triumphant, stepping into the light of wisdom. And then just as quickly they disappeared undone. Not by an enemy, not by famine or disease, but by the very knowledge they had sought. The moment they placed their hand upon the switch of understanding, they also pressed the button of their own undoing. This is the paradox at the heart of our story, and it will guide us like a dark thread through the tapestry of the next hours. Knowledge is not always a gift, and physics, beautiful, elegant, intoxicating, may also be the most dangerous temptation in the universe. To open the door to truth might be to unlock the cell of your own execution. The image is as old as myth. Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, a gift that would warm our hands, cook our food, light our nights, and shape our civilizations. But the same fire that allowed us to survive could just as easily consume everything if left uncontrolled. Knowledge is never neutral, it is a blade with two edges, and physics is perhaps the sharpest blade of all. What began with the wonder of stargazing and the gentle beauty of falling apples eventually led us to atomic bombs, weapons, capable of erasing cities in seconds. We learned not only how stars shine, but also how to mimic their violent cause here on Earth. Every civilization that follows this same path from curiosity to comprehension may find that the light of discovery is indistinguishable from the flash of annihilation. Think of the first time humanity split the atom. The discovery was framed as progress, as science breaking through the veil of ignorance. Yet almost immediately it was turned into fire that devoured 100,000 lives in an instant. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, names that prove the double-edged nature of physics, and those were only the first sparks. Beyond nuclear fire lie other possibilities, theories scribbled on chalkboards that, if ever made real, could unravel not just a city, not just a planet, but an entire region of the universe. A false vacuum collapse, a runaway chain reaction, a miniature black hole gone rogue, all born not from malice, but from an earnest desire to understand how reality works. So we must ask ourselves, is the destiny of intelligence itself to discover physics, build weapons, and then die by them? Are we watching the universe's civilizations repeat the same grim cycle, each one blooming brightly for a moment, only to wither at the exact point where they should have reached their highest potential? It is almost as if the cosmos is playing a cruel joke. It dangles the fruit of knowledge just within reach, but hidden inside is a seed of destruction. The moment a species takes a bite savoring the sweetness of discovery, the poison begins its work. And perhaps this is why the sky is so silent. Not because no one else is out there, but because the ones who were there are gone extinguished by the very brilliance that once made them shine. When we gaze into the dark and wonder why no alien voices have answered our call, perhaps the truth is that they never had the chance. Perhaps just like us, they once built telescopes, accelerators, laboratories. They once wrote equations that revealed the bones of the cosmos. They once marveled at their own genius, believing themselves on the brink of becoming eternal. And then, before they could send out a single message across the stars, their light went out. Take a moment to consider this. If every civilization falls at the same point, then physics is not just the language of the universe, it is also its executioner. Discovery and destruction walk hand in hand, and perhaps they always have. But then, another question arises, one even more unsettling. If this is truly the pattern, If knowledge itself is the trap that kills its seeker, then why is the universe so eerily quiet? Shouldn't we at least hear the dying screams, the last signals, the echoes of civilizations reaching out in the desperation before they collapse? Why is there only silence, as though the moment of destruction is also the moment of vanishing without a trace? This silence is not comforting. It does not feel empty but heavy, like the hush that falls after a great disaster when the dust is still settling and the air is thick with the memory of what has been lost. The silence itself may be the proof, the smoking gun. So here we stand at the threshold of the first great question. In our journey, is physics the doorway to enlightenment or the trigger of extinction? And if civilizations everywhere have walked through that same doorway, why are the halls of the universe so empty, so quiet, so utterly void of voices? If there are billions of stars and billions of planets circling them, then why is no one speaking? Why is there only silence? The question feels simple, even almost childish, yet it carries a weight that has unsettled some of the greatest minds in history. We know the numbers. Our own galaxy alone contains hundreds of billions of stars, and the observable universe stretches beyond comprehension, seeded with countless worlds. Many of these worlds should be old enough, stable enough, and fertile enough for life to rise. By the laws of probability alone, we should not be unique. And yet, when we listen, we hear nothing but a great and endless hush. This puzzle is often called the Fermi Paradox, named after the physicist Enrico Fermi, who famously asked over lunch one day, "Where is everybody?" It was a deceptively casual question posed without ceremony, but its echo has haunted astrophysics and philosophy ever since. If life is common as the numbers suggest, then advanced civilizations should have appeared long ago, spreading through the galaxy, leaving behind some evidence of their existence. Yet we search the skies with our radio telescopes, scanning for the faintest trace of an artificial signal, and what greets us is the deep, almost oppressive quiet of space. Imagine walking into a forest so large that it stretches beyond the horizon, a forest teeming with trees, rivers, and meadows. You would expect birdsong, the rustle of animals in the underbrush, the hum of life surrounding you. But instead you hear nothing. No wings fluttering overhead, no predators moving silently between the trunks, no distant cry of a creature marking its territory. Only silence, heavy and strange. You would feel a chill, wouldn't you? Not because you are alone, but because it feels impossible that you could be. That is the strangeness of our universe. The stars are the trees of that cosmic forest, and the planets are its fertile soil. By all rights, there should be noise, shouts, whispers, greetings, warnings, yet there is only an unsettling stillness. It is almost as if the forest is filled with predators, each one hiding, holding its breath, waiting for someone foolish enough to call out. Or perhaps the forest was once filled with voices, but now they have all gone silent, leaving only ghosts in the air. Take a moment with this. Imagine civilizations that rose millions of years before us, brilliant and ambitious, spreading their ideas and technologies across the stars. Surely, if they had endured, we would see their fingerprints, great machines orbiting distant suns, megastructures, eclipsing starlight signals deliberately aimed at us, or perhaps leaking unintentionally like radio static across the void. Yet the skies remain blank. The silence is not just mysterious, it is haunting. There are many possible explanations, of course. Some scientists suggest that civilizations are so far apart in both time and distance that their signals never overlap. Others imagine that intelligent life is vanishingly rare, that Earth is a miraculous exception in a largely barren cosmos. But there is one explanation, dark and terrible, that fits uncomfortably well with the story we began to tell. Perhaps civilizations do arise. Perhaps they do flourish. Perhaps they do reach the threshold of physics, only to destroy themselves before their voices can reach anyone else. If this is true, then the silence is not evidence of emptiness, but evidence of tragedy. The stillness of the galaxy may not be the absence of sound, but the sound of endings. Picture it: billions of civilizations across cosmic history, each one bright, with potential each one silenced in the same way at the same moment, the instant they understood the deepest truths of their universe. The quiet we hear today would then be the accumulated result of countless extinguished voices, each cut short before they could travel across the light years to meet us. Now, pause here for just a breath. Let yourself feel the weight of that silence. It is not just an abstract problem for philosophers and astronomers. It is a reflection of our own fragility. When we listen to the empty sky, we are not only searching for others, we are hearing a possible echo of our future. If every civilization collapses under the weight of its own discoveries, then we too may be standing at the edge of that same abyss. And yet there is something even more unsettling than the silence itself. If civilizations die when they discover physics, why is the silence so complete? Shouldn't we at the very least detect fragments, final signals, desperate broadcasts of species crying out as they fall? The absence of even those echoes suggests something swift and merciless, a kind of destruction that leaves no time for farewells. Perhaps the moment of enlightenment is also the moment of vanishing so immediate that nothing escapes. The Fermi Paradox does not give us answers, it gives us a mirror. It forces us to look at ourselves and ask the questions no one wants to face. Are we different? Or are we simply following the same path, one more voice soon to be swallowed by silence? The paradox is not just about the stars. It is about us here now listening to the universe and wondering whether we are hearing our own fate. So, as we move forward, hold on to this feeling of stillness, this strange tension between expectation and absence. It is the backdrop of everything that follows. The question is not just why the universe is quiet, but what kind of truth that quiet is trying to hide. And perhaps if we look closely enough, we will discover not only why civilizations vanish, but also what particular danger in physics is powerful enough to erase them before they can even whisper their presence across the stars. Humanity brushed against the self-destruct switch the very first time it unraveled the secrets of the nucleus. It is almost poetic in a tragic way that the dawn of nuclear physics coincided with the twilight of innocence. Until the early 20th century, the atom was imagined as a tiny, indivisible building block, a quiet and stable foundation upon which reality was constructed. But then came discoveries that split open the heart of matter and revealed a staggering reservoir of energy hidden within. That energy was not theoretical, not symbolic, but terrifyingly real enough to flatten cities, burn the sky, and twist history in a single instant. The moment humanity realized that splitting an atom released unimaginable power, the seed of our undoing was planted. What began as equations scribbled on chalkboards soon became experiments in secret laboratories, then blueprints for weapons, then firestorms consuming human lives. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are not abstract chapters in a textbook. They are proof that knowledge itself can become a turning point. A single discovery transformed the world order, defined politics for half a century, and left shadows etched into concrete walls where human bodies once stood. It is tempting to tell ourselves that science is neutral, that it is merely a tool shaped by the hands that wield it. But nuclear physics suggests something darker, something more intrinsic. To unlock the secrets of the nucleus is to conjure fire too large to contain. The bomb is not an accident, not a side effect. It is the direct offspring of understanding. Knowledge and destruction arrive hand in hand, as if bound together by some cruel symmetry. Think for a moment about the speed of this transformation. The first controlled nuclear chain reaction took place in 1942. Barely 3 years later, bombs were falling from the sky. 3 years. That is the span between discovery and devastation, between curiosity and catastrophe. Human civilization had only just learned to harness electricity on a global scale, had only just begun to explore the upper reaches of its own atmosphere, and already it had created a weapon capable of ending itself. If a young species like ours could stumble so quickly into annihilation, what might a civilization millions of years older achieve? Imagine minds far more advanced than ours, armed with mathematics we cannot even conceive, peering into dimensions of physics we have yet to glimpse. Would their discoveries give them energy enough to travel the stars or the power to erase their entire planet in a heartbeat? We are forced to ask whether knowledge always scales upward, dragging destruction with it. Each new equation, a blueprint for a new apocalypse. The bomb did more than kill. It reshaped our understanding of existence itself. For the first time, humanity realized that it held the keys not only to life but to its own extinction. Every political decision, every scientific advancement, every act of war or peace now carried the shadow of nuclear fire. The balance of the world tilted on the edge of deterrence, a delicate stalemate where the price of aggression was nothing less than the collapse of civilization. Living under the mushroom cloud, we discovered that intelligence is fragile and that progress is not always salvation. Pause here and let yourself feel that weight. You and I are alive in a time when our species can end itself with the push of a button. That fact alone should terrify us, yet it has become ordinary background noise in the hum of daily life. It is so easy to forget that every hour of every day, the fire of our own undoing waits patiently in silos and submarines resting inside quiet machines scattered across the globe. Humanity's greatest invention doubles as its greatest threat, an unblinking reminder that the knowledge which empowers us is also the knowledge that can erase us. But nuclear fire is not unique to Earth. If intelligence follows a similar path elsewhere, then every civilization that discovers the nucleus faces the same moment of truth. Do they control the flame, or does the flame consume them? And how many worlds have burned because their inhabitants could not resist the temptation to wield that power? The silence of the universe begins to look less like mystery and more like aftermath, the quiet field after a battlefield has gone cold. There is a haunting symmetry in how quickly we used our new knowledge to destroy rather than preserve. It suggests that self-destruction is not an accident, but an almost inevitable step. Perhaps the very moment a civilization learns enough to split atoms, it writes its own death sentence. Perhaps this is the filter through which most intelligent life cannot pass the barrier that reduces the galaxy to silence. And yet what we have seen so far may only be the opening act. Nuclear fire is terrifying, yes, but compared to what lies further down the path of physics, it may be nothing more than a prelude. When we consider the possibilities that wait in the shadows of quantum theory, high-energy experiments, or the manipulation of space-time itself, the bomb begins to look like a spark compared to the inferno that might come. If the atomic bomb was our first step into dangerous knowledge, then what comes next may decide whether we walk further into light or vanish into darkness. Nuclear fire showed us the price of curiosity, but also the truth that the cost grows higher the deeper we look. And so as we turn the page, we must ask ourselves a chilling question. If splitting the atom threatened our survival, then what hidden dangers lie in the discoveries yet to come? Perhaps the bomb was never the climax, only the prologue, faint rumble before the true storm. There are theories of weapons so vast, so final, that a single mistake could erase an entire planet. Not just a city, not just a nation, but every living thing, every breath of air, every ocean, mountain, and forest gone in a single chain of events. The very idea chills the imagination because it is not fantasy, not science fiction, but a logical extension of what we already know. Nuclear fire, devastating as it is, still leaves behind survivors, ruins, echoes of what once was. A true doomsday device leaves nothing. The concept of a doomsday machine has haunted human thought since the mid-20th century. At the height of the Cold War, when the world's superpowers stared at one another, across oceans of fear, strategists and scientists alike began to imagine something even darker than the bombs already stockpiled in silos and submarines. They asked, what if there were a weapon so powerful? It guaranteed mutual destruction beyond doubt. What if one device could ensure that should anyone dare to strike first, the world itself would end? In those questions was the seed of the ultimate deterrent, a machine that by its very existence made war unthinkable. But there was another side to that coin, one far more terrifying, the idea that such a machine could be built at all. Take, for example, the cobalt bomb. In theory, it was simple. Surround a nuclear weapon with a thick jacket of cobalt metal, so that when the bomb detonates, the cobalt turns into cobalt-60, an isotope that is intensely radioactive with a half-life long enough to poison the Earth for decades. The explosion itself would kill millions instantly, but the true horror would be slower and more complete. Invisible dust would drift into the atmosphere, spreading across the globe, falling with the rain, seeping into soil and water, saturating every breath of air. In time, every creature that survived the blast would be undone by radiation, leaving the planet quiet, barren, and glowing with a deadly aftertaste. This was not science fiction. The design was technically feasible. It was even discussed publicly by physicists like Leo Szilard, one of the men who helped create the atomic bomb. Though no cobalt bomb was ever built, the mere fact that it could be built was enough to keep the idea alive, lurking in the shadows of nuclear policy. Humanity stood at the edge of invention and looked down into a chasm where the abyss gazed back. And the cobalt bomb was only one of many thought experiments that pushed the imagination of destruction to its limits. Some theorists proposed devices that could ignite a runaway chain reaction in the atmosphere or the oceans, fusing nitrogen or hydrogen uncontrollably until the very air and seas burned away. These ideas were speculative, yes, but they were born not out of fiction but out of the terrifying uncertainty that comes whenever new physics is tested. When the first atomic bomb was being prepared, some scientists whispered nervously about the possibility that it might ignite the atmosphere. They were reassured by calculations that suggested otherwise, but the fact remains the fear was not entirely irrational. A single mistake could in principle consume everything. Now imagine a civilization older than ours, more advanced, armed with equations and machines beyond our comprehension. If our crude experiments raised the spectre of doomsday, what monsters might their laboratories create? The more deeply one understands the structure of reality, the more buttons appear on the console of existence, each one labeled with possibilities we can barely imagine. And it takes only one hand, one push, one error to end it all. There is a grim irony here. The more a species masters physics, the more capable it becomes, not of saving itself, but of designing its own funeral. Knowledge becomes a staircase, each step higher, each view broader, but at the top there may be nothing but a cliff edge. And perhaps the reason we hear no voices in the sky is that civilizations again and again climb that staircase, marvel at the horizon, and then fall. Pause with that thought. Consider what it means that our species, only a few hundred years into the scientific method, already knows how to erase itself. Now project that timeline forward. What would we invent in another 1,000 years or 10,000? If we were capable of cobalt bombs and hypothetical planet-igniting experiments within a single century of nuclear physics, what nightmares might be born after millennia of discovery? Could there be weapons that don't just end life on a planet but collapse, stars unravel galaxies, or even destabilize the fabric of space-time itself? The mind resists such images, but they are no more impossible than the bombs seem to those who lived before 1945. The notion of a doomsday device does not belong only to strategy or science, it belongs to philosophy. It forces us to confront the possibility that intelligence itself may be inherently unstable, that the path of discovery leads not to immortality, but to self-erasure. The more advanced a civilization becomes, the more fragile it is, for fragility is not the absence of strength, but the abundance of ways in which things can go wrong. A Stone Age tribe can kill one another with spears, yes, but they cannot sterilize a planet. A civilization with cobalt bombs, antimatter, or quantum experiments might accomplish in an hour what evolution took billions of years to create. This raises a question that lingers at the edge of everything we have discussed so far. Where does it end? What is the ultimate boundary of dangerous knowledge? If cobalt bombs are the nightmare of our infancy, what are the nightmares of our adulthood? If one small miscalculation in physics can poison a planet, then what lies hidden in the undiscovered equations that govern the universe? Perhaps there are truths so dangerous that merely learning them is a death sentence. Perhaps the silence of the cosmos is the silence of those who learn too much too soon. And so as we stand in this moment of uneasy reflection, we cannot help but wonder if nuclear fire was the prologue and doomsday device is the next chapter, then what waits further in the book of physics? What discoveries linger in the pages ahead, waiting patiently for us to turn to them? Unaware that the act of reading may be the act of ending, the question remains, open a shadow at the edge of our understanding. If this is only the beginning, then what is the end? It takes only the tiniest mistake, the most minute miscalculation for the unimaginable to unfold. Picture a laboratory filled with machines humming softly, their operators focused on equations glowing across screens. One adjustment to a magnetic field, one collision of particles pushed just a fraction too far, and the very foundation of reality might shift. Not a city destroyed, not a planet scorched, but something deeper, something woven into the structure of existence itself. The leap from nuclear fire to the realm of theoretical physics is like stepping from a burning house into a lightning storm. In one space, the danger is visible, obvious, and human-made. In the other, the danger is invisible, abstract, and fundamental. The 20th century gave us nuclear bombs, yes, but it also birthed particle accelerators, quantum field theory, and the uneasy realization that reality itself may be less stable than it appears. And with that realization came an even more disturbing possibility, that our curiosity could one day trigger events no one can stop. One of the most haunting scenarios is known as vacuum decay. In our current understanding, the universe exists in a delicate state called the false vacuum. It is not perfectly stable, merely metastable, like a ball resting on the slope of a hill rather than its deepest valley. If the ball were ever nudged even slightly, it would roll down into a more stable state. Translated into cosmic terms, this means that the universe we inhabit may not be the most stable version of reality. A tiny disturbance, perhaps a high-energy event, could cause it to collapse into a true vacuum, rewriting the laws of physics as it spreads. If such a collapse were triggered, it would not be an explosion in the ordinary sense. It would be a silent, unstoppable wave, racing outward at the speed of light, converting everything it touched into a different form of existence. One moment you would be here listening, breathing alive. The next, without warning, you would not exist at all. No pain, no suffering, just instant annihilation. The universe you knew gone rewritten into something alien. And if that idea terrifies you, it should. The unnerving part is that this is not just idle speculation. Some physicists have debated whether certain high-energy experiments, such as smashing particles together at unprecedented speeds, might increase the chance of triggering vacuum decay. Most calculations suggest the risk is effectively zero. But think about what that really means. To reassure ourselves, we are relying on equations written by fallible beings. Equations built upon assumptions that may themselves be incomplete. For now, we say it is safe. But if even the tiniest mistake lingers in those numbers, the cost is not one life, not one planet, but everything. And vacuum decay is only one nightmare. Another is the possibility of creating artificial black holes. When particles collide with sufficient energy, in theory they could form minuscule singularities, regions where matter collapses under its own gravity into an infinitely dense point. The official stance is that such black holes would evaporate almost instantly through a process known as Hawking radiation. But again, the safety of this claim rests on equations on human confidence in models. If those models are wrong, a micro-black hole might instead grow, feeding on the matter around it, slowly devouring the Earth from the inside out. The thought is almost absurd, like something out of pulp science fiction, and yet it has been raised in sober seriousness by physicists themselves. Before the Large Hadron Collider was turned on, there were actual lawsuits filed, attempts to prevent the machine's operation on the grounds that it might accidentally destroy the planet. Those lawsuits failed, the collider was activated, and the world did not end. But the fear itself reveals something deeper, the understanding that when humans press the boundaries of knowledge, they are playing with forces far larger than themselves. Now, extend that scenario beyond humanity. Imagine a civilization 1 million years older than ours. with technology far beyond the clumsy accelerators we bury underground. They would not be tinkering with protons and neutrons like curious children. They might be splitting space-time itself, bending quantum fields, and unlocking the hidden machinery of the cosmos. If the risks at our level already whisper of doomsday, what catastrophes might emerge when the stakes are higher? Could they accidentally unravel their corner of the universe? Could curiosity, unbounded and insatiable, be the silent executioner that visits every advanced mind? It is not hard to see why the silence of the stars begins to feel heavier in this light. Perhaps there were once countless civilizations scattered across galaxies, each one burning bright for a time. But in their pursuit of truth, they may have stumbled into dangers they could not predict. A particle smashed in the wrong way. A quantum event nudged past its threshold. A black hole born too hungry, and entire worlds would vanish. Not in fire, not in war, but in quiet accidents of discovery. What makes this even more unsettling is how natural curiosity is. You and I cannot help but wonder. We look at the stars and ask, what is out there? We look at matter and ask, what is it made of? Curiosity is not just a habit, it is instinct hardwired into intelligence itself. To tell a civilization to stop being curious is like telling water to stop flowing downhill. It cannot be done. Which means that the very trait that allows intelligence to survive and thrive may also be the one that ensures its eventual destruction. I want you to sit with that thought for a moment. Think of yourself as part of a species driven to ask questions, to dig deeper, to peel back layers of mystery. It feels noble, doesn't it? It feels like the essence of what it means to be alive. But then imagine that the final question, the last mystery, is the one that erases everything. What if every civilization that reaches this point faces the same fate, not because they are evil, not because they are reckless, but because they are curious? And here is where we face the most haunting possibility of all. Maybe this is not a flaw at all, but a law. Maybe the universe is structured in such a way that intelligence always carries within it the seed of its own undoing. Maybe the silence we hear when we listen to the cosmos is not a void waiting to be filled, but a graveyard of voices that ask too many questions. So the question becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? Do we halt our experiments, silence our curiosity, and freeze ourselves in ignorance? That would mean denying what we are cutting out the very core of our being. Or do we continue knowing that each step forward might be the one that ends the journey forever? If the story of nuclear fire was the prologue and doomsday machines the first chapter, then vacuum decay and black holes are the dark passages, ahead where the light flickers and the ground is uncertain. And as we move through them, we must ask ourselves, are we walking toward enlightenment or toward an inevitable end? Perhaps both. Perhaps there is no difference. What remains is this: curiosity is not a trap laid by the universe. It is part of the universe. To be curious is to be alive, to be intelligent. But perhaps, just perhaps, it is also to be doomed. And if that is true, then the silence of the cosmos is not mysterious at all. It is simply the sound of curiosity finishing its work. If curiosity saved us, it might also kill us. That contradiction sits at the very center of what it means to be intelligent. From the first spark of wonder that drove early humans to look at fire, instead of running from it to the equations scribbled on chalkboards that split the atom, curiosity has been both the ladder we climb and the cliff we risk falling from. It is the trait that lifted us above other animals, yet it is the same trait that tempts us toward dangers no other creature could ever imagine. Think about it. Every leap in human history has come from a refusal to be satisfied with what already was. Why stay in the cave when you can build a village? Why settle for walking when you can carve a wheel? Why accept the sun's cycle when you can learn to store firelight and stretch the night into day? That itch to know more, to reach further, is not an optional feature of intelligence, it is the beating heart of it. Without curiosity, we would never have become human at all. But curiosity, unlike instinct for food or shelter, has no natural limit. A lion eats until it is full. A bird flies until it finds safety. But a human or any intelligent creature keeps asking why long after the basic needs are met. Why does lightning strike? Why do stars shine? Why does matter exist at all? Every question answered breeds another, and there is no finish line. Curiosity is infinite, which means the dangers it uncovers may also be infinite. This is where the paradox begins to sharpen. Because intelligence once born cannot stop. A civilization cannot remain forever in the safety of ignorance, no matter how much wisdom it preaches. Eventually, someone will wonder, someone will test, someone will push the boundary further. Even if most resist, a single curious mind is enough to unleash discoveries that reshape everything. That is how we climbed the evolutionary ladder, and it is also how we placed our hand on the first switch of annihilation. Nuclear weapons were perhaps the most obvious proof. No other animal could have created them. They required not just hands and tools, but equations, experiments, and years of relentless curiosity about the invisible world inside atoms. What began as innocent questions, what is matter made of, what holds it together, led us to the power to level entire cities in an instant. And here is the uncomfortable truth. There was no way to stop that trajectory once it started. The moment we asked the first why about atoms, the end result was already set in motion. Now extend that to any intelligence in the cosmos. If curiosity is the engine that drives survival, then it is also the mechanism that sets the trap. To thrive is to ask questions. To ask questions is to discover power. And to discover power is to risk destroying oneself. In that sense, evolution may not be a ladder at all, but a loop, one that circles back on itself. You climb, you reach, you understand, and in the end you create the tools that undo everything you built. I want you to pause here and imagine another world, another species, millions of light years away. Perhaps they too began as hunters or gatherers or something we cannot even picture. They learned, they grew, they asked questions. Their curiosity lifted them into intelligence just as it did us. But as their knowledge deepened, so too did their arsenal. Their weapons grew sharper, their machines more dangerous, until one day they reached the same precipice we now stand on. And then, silence. Maybe they destroyed themselves quickly in fire. Maybe slowly through experiments gone wrong. Maybe they simply collapsed under the weight of their own inventions. But either way, their story ended, not in ignorance, but in knowing too much. This is why some thinkers call curiosity an evolutionary trap, because unlike other traits, it carries no natural safeguard. Strength weakens with age. Hunger ends when you eat. But curiosity, once ignited, burns forever. It will not stop until it either reshapes the universe or erases the hand that holds it. And here is the chilling thought. What if this is not unique to us? What if every civilization that ever emerges, no matter its biology or culture, is destined to walk the same path, one that leads to self-destruction by its own brilliance? That would make curiosity the greatest gift and the deadliest poison in existence. It ensures progress, but it also ensures risk, and sooner or later that risk outweighs survival. In this light, the great silence of the universe may not be so mysterious after all. Perhaps we are not hearing other voices, because each one in its own time fell into the same trap. They knew too much too quickly and could not survive their own questions. Now, I want to ask you directly, what would you do if you were given the choice? Would you stop asking questions if it meant survival? Would you choose ignorance over knowledge, safety over discovery? Most of us recoil at that thought. To live without curiosity feels like not living at all. And that in itself may be the answer. Civilizations do not resist the trap, because resisting would mean betraying their very essence. They would rather risk death than silence their questions. This brings us back to the concept of the great filter, the hypothetical barrier that explains why we do not see other advanced civilizations. Maybe it is not plagues or asteroids or wars that filter them out. Maybe it is this, the evolutionary inevitability of curiosity leading to destruction. In other words, the very thing that makes intelligence possible also ensures that it cannot last forever. The filter is not outside us. It is inside us in our very nature. But does that mean hope is gone? Not necessarily. Perhaps the filter is not absolute. Perhaps a few civilizations find ways to channel their curiosity into safer forms, to build safeguards strong enough to withstand their own brilliance. Maybe they survive by weaving wisdom into every question they ask. If so, then our silence is not because all have failed, but because the successful few are rare, scattered, and perhaps cautious enough to hide their presence. Still, the odds are sobering. When you look up at the stars tonight, remember that every light may represent a story cut short by the same trap we now face. And remember too that we are still in motion, still climbing, still asking. The filter may be ahead of us, waiting in the form of discoveries we cannot yet imagine. Whether we survive it will depend on choices we have not yet made. So here we are, standing on the edge of the evolutionary trap. Curiosity has carried us from caves to space stations, from whispers of fire to whispers of the quantum vacuum. It has given us life, and it may yet demand its price. The silence of the universe may be the echo of countless others who walked this same path, who asked one question too many. The only mystery that remains is whether we will join them, or whether somehow we will find a way to ask and survive. Maybe the reason we have not seen anyone else out there is because everyone else has already been removed. That is the haunting suggestion of what scientists and philosophers call the Great Filter, a hypothetical barrier that looms over every attempt at explaining why the universe is so silent. At first glance, it seems like an elegant solution to Fermi's question. If the stars are countless and the planets abundant, then the silence must mean that life, or at least intelligent life, rarely makes it through all the stages required to spread across the cosmos. Somewhere along the way, most of them are filtered out. The Great Filter can sit in many places. It might be behind us in the staggering improbability of life itself ever beginning. In this version, the miracle has already happened. The chemical chaos that gave rise to self-replicating molecules might be such an impossibly rare accident that we are against all odds one of the very few forms of life to exist at all. If that is the case, then we may actually be safe. The silence is not threatening but reassuring, because it means the filter has already been crossed. We won the cosmic lottery, and the universe is not full of destroyed civilizations. It is simply empty. But the darker possibility is that the filter lies ahead of us. In this scenario, life is common, even intelligence is common, but nearly all civilizations stumble into the same deadly threshold. Perhaps it is nuclear fire, perhaps it is engineered pandemics, runaway technology, or the temptation of physics experiments that rewrite reality itself. Whatever form it takes, the outcome is always the same: silence. If this is true, then the fact that we are still here only means we have not yet reached the filter. We are walking toward it even now, step by step, with every discovery that expands our knowledge and every invention that expands our power. This thought alone is enough to keep some scientists awake at night. Because when you look up into the stars, what you are really looking at is a graveyard. Each point of light might once have been home to a civilization that asked too many questions, dug too deep, reached too far. Each one might have been full of minds, stories, and voices that are now gone erased by the same evolutionary trap we discussed before. If the Great Filter is real, then we are not pioneers in a quiet frontier. We are survivors in a field of ruins, still alive only because we have not yet triggered the same fate. And here is where the unease grows sharper. Think about our place in time. Humanity has only just begun to leave its cradle. A mere century ago, flight was new and electricity was a luxury. Now we send machines across the solar system, we split atoms for energy, we peer into the quantum fabric of existence. The pace of change is staggering, and it suggests that the most dangerous thresholds are not centuries away, but right around the corner. If the filter is ahead, then we may be rushing toward it faster than we realize. I want you to stop and ask yourself something uncomfortable. If the Great Filter is real, and if nearly all civilizations fail to pass it, why should we believe we are the exception? Why should we think that, unlike countless others who may have come before, We will be the lucky ones to thread the needle of survival. That is the question that gnaws at the edges of the silence. Maybe we are not special. Maybe we are simply next. Yet it is not all despair. There is another way to see it. The fact that we are asking these questions at all might mean something. Awareness itself is a kind of weapon against the filter. If civilizations fall because they never recognize the danger of their own curiosity, then perhaps the act of pausing, reflecting, and imagining the possibility of destruction is the first step toward avoiding it. After all, no animal but us can contemplate extinction. No other species spends sleepless nights wondering how to preserve itself against risks it does not yet fully understand. Maybe that is our hidden advantage. But then again, knowledge is not enough. History is full of warnings that being aware of danger does not always prevent disaster. Leaders knew nuclear weapons could end the world, and still they built thousands. Societies knew pollution could poison their air and seas, and still they pumped toxins into the sky. Perhaps wisdom lags behind curiosity, and that lag is exactly where the filter claims its victims. By the time a civilization realizes the stakes, it may already be too late. Still, the very idea of the Great Filter invites us to see our existence differently. If the filter is behind us, then we are extraordinary. We are one of the rare few who made it past the hardest step, and our future may be wide open. If the filter is ahead, then we live in the most perilous chapter of our history, with survival hanging by the thinnest of threads. Either way, the silence of the universe is not meaningless. It is a mirror, forcing us to confront the fragility of our own story. Now imagine the possibility of exceptions. Could there be civilizations that somehow thread the needle, that find ways to restrain their own power without extinguishing their curiosity? Could they be out there surviving quietly, watching others burn out while choosing to remain unseen? If so, then the silence might not be absolute. It might simply be caution, a strategy of survival. After all, if the universe is full of traps, then shouting into the dark may not be the wisest move. And that possibility is strangely comforting, because it suggests that silence is not always a grave, but sometimes a choice. Perhaps the reason we have not heard from others is because the survivors learned better than to announce themselves. They passed the filter by growing wise enough to know that survival sometimes means restraint. So here we stand caught between two stories. In one, we are a cosmic miracle, already past the hardest test. In the other, we are rushing headlong into a future that has consumed countless others before us. Either way, the Great Filter forces us to see our place in the cosmos with humility. We are rare, or we are doomed, or we are both at once. When you look at the night sky, let yourself feel the weight of that silence. Do not dismiss it as empty. It may be the silence of failure, or it may be the silence of survivors who learn to hide. The only question that remains is whether we will become part of that silence, or whether against all odds we will be the exception that proves it wrong. If the Great Filter is real, and if most civilizations are doomed to collapse under the weight of their own brilliance, then what does it mean to imagine that a few might survive? That thought alone feels almost rebellious, as though survival itself is an act of defiance against the universe's statistics. What if there are worlds where intelligence did not lead inevitably to self-destruction, but to something far more difficult? Something we often struggle to imagine for ourselves: wisdom. Not every species must be destined to obliterate itself. It is tempting, perhaps even comforting, to think of advanced civilizations as fundamentally different from us beings who are more rational, more disciplined, less prone to the petty rivalries and short-sighted greed that still dominate our world. But the truth may be both more inspiring and more unsettling. Maybe they were not so different at all. Maybe they too struggled with division, with fear, with reckless ambition. The difference might not have been in their nature, but in their choices. At some point they could have recognized the cliff edge and, instead of rushing forward, found a way to stop. What would that take? It is easy enough to say wisdom or discipline, but in practice, survival at that scale might demand something far more profound: It would require collective intelligence that is not simply a sum of individuals acting in self-interest, but a coordinated effort in which the species as a whole learns to prioritize long-term survival over immediate gain. That is not instinctive for us. Evolution trained us to fight for our own lives, our families, our tribes, to think beyond that, to care about people we will never meet, or generations that will not be born for centuries goes against the grain of biology. And yet it may be the only way forward. Imagine a civilization standing on the threshold of nuclear power or bioengineering or quantum manipulation. They realize, as we are beginning to realize, that these tools are double-edged. The same technologies that could heal, feed, and empower billions could also in careless hands end everything. In that moment, survival ceases to be a matter of dominance. It becomes a matter of restraint, of creating rules that no individual or group can ignore. They would have to invent not just laws, but a kind of global wisdom, an agreement that survival of the whole must come before the desires of the few. That sounds impossibly idealistic when applied to us. After all, we can barely cooperate on controlling carbon emissions, much less on restraining technologies that could destroy the planet in an instant. But the fact that we are even trying, however, imperfectly, shows that the seed of such cooperation exists. Perhaps civilizations that endure are those who manage somehow to water that seed before it is too late. Of course, the obstacles are immense. Every civilization like ours must face the problem of power. Power is seductive. It promises control, security, prestige. It convinces leaders and nations that they can bend the rules, that they can be the exception. But power also blinds. A single misstep by a powerful few can unravel the work of millions. To survive, a civilization would need mechanisms strong enough to counteract that temptation. Maybe they invented institutions that held leaders accountable in ways we cannot yet imagine. Maybe they developed cultural values that stigmatized reckless curiosity, transforming what was once a virtue into a taboo. Or maybe they simply learned through close calls and near catastrophes that the only real victory was survival itself. But here is where you and I must pause. Ask yourself honestly, could we ever do that? Could humanity, with all its divisions and conflicts, actually build a system that prioritizes collective survival over everything else? The question is not theoretical. It hangs over us now. And it is uncomfortable because the answer depends not just on leaders or scientists, but on us. On whether ordinary people can learn to see themselves as part of a single, fragile whole. If civilizations have survived this test, then what must their worlds look like? Perhaps their skies are not filled with endless wars or competition, but with the quiet hum of technologies managed under strict collective oversight. Perhaps their stories are not dominated by conquest, but by restraint, by the recognition that just because something can be done does not mean it should be. It might seem like a dull future compared to the fiery drama of our own history, but perhaps that dullness is exactly what survival requires. Still, survival does not have to mean stagnation. A civilization that learns to control its destructive power could still explore, innovate, and create, but with guardrails in place that prevent catastrophe. They might not spread recklessly across the galaxy, but cautiously, carefully, leaving behind not a trail of ruins, but a network of sustainable outposts. They might still dream, but their dreams would be shaped by the hard knowledge of how fragile life truly is. And here is where the thought turns both thrilling and frightening. If even one civilization has managed to do this, to transcend the evolutionary traps and the great filter, then the universe is not empty. It is not a graveyard, but a field where at least a few flowers bloom. Their silence might then be a choice, not a curse. Perhaps they watch quietly, not out of malice, but out of prudence, waiting to see whether others like us can also pass through the fire without being consumed. The possibility of their existence matters because it reframes the question of our own survival. If it can be done, then our doom is not inevitable. But survival will not happen by accident. It will not happen because of luck or blind optimism. It will happen only if we learn collectively to act with a wisdom that evolution never prepared us for. So let us consider the challenge laid before us. To survive, we must transform curiosity from a weapon into a tool. We must transform competition from a zero-sum game into a shared project. We must transform intelligence from a means of domination into a means of restraint. It is not easy. It may feel unnatural, but if we fail, the silence of the stars will remind us why. When you look up tonight, think of the civilizations that may have already faced this test. Some may have failed, their voices silenced forever, but maybe, just maybe, a few survived. If they could, then perhaps we can too. The question is whether we will recognize the cliff edge before it is too late, or whether, like so many others, we will rush headlong into the abyss. What would it mean for an entire planet to think as one? The idea feels almost alien yet strangely familiar because, in a way, every individual brain already works like this. Billions of neurons fire, compete, cooperate, and communicate until what emerges is not chaos but thought. Perhaps civilizations that survive the dangers of their own intelligence must eventually find a way to mirror this process, turning billions of separate minds into something greater, something collective. At first glance, such a possibility can feel unsettling. We treasure individuality. We define ourselves by our unique choices, our distinct voices, our freedom to dissent. The thought of merging all that into a planetary hive mind sounds less like survival and more like a prison dressed as progress. And yet history shows us that the more interconnected a society becomes, the more it behaves like a single organism. Tribes become cities, cities become nations, and nations link into global networks. Each stage comes with resistance, with fear of lost identity, but also with undeniable power. A civilization that thinks together can act with coordination far beyond the reach of fractured groups. It can avoid the pitfalls of conflict that destroy so many before they even reach maturity. Imagine then a civilization facing its own brink. Weapons of planetary scale exist. Mistakes could wipe out millions in an instant, and distrust among nations threatens to light fires that none could extinguish. They face the same choice we face now: continue to act as competing fragments, or discover a way to align their wills into something closer to unity. Perhaps they built institutions so robust that no faction could seize control. Perhaps they harnessed technology to mediate disputes with perfect impartiality. Or perhaps they went further, merging their individual consciousnesses into networks where personal interest could no longer override collective need. In such a world, conflict would look very different. There would be no secret plots, no hidden agendas, no rival nations waiting to strike. Decisions would be processed through the collective, weighed not by short-term gain but by long-term survival. If one part of the whole suffered, the pain would be felt by all. Sacrifices for the common good would not need to be coerced, because they would be shared as naturally as a body prioritizes healing over comfort. This perhaps is the path some civilizations have taken to slip past the great filter, not through restraint alone but through transformation. Yet the cost of such harmony cannot be ignored. To think as one individuals must surrender something fundamental: freedom of thought, the right to dissent, the messy creativity that comes from clashing perspectives. These might all fade in a truly collective intelligence. What emerges may no longer resemble the beings that created it. Imagine a planet where individuals still walk and speak, but their thoughts are synchronized like waves in an ocean. Their decisions aligned by an overarching system, maybe an AI vast enough to mediate every action, or maybe a genuine merging of minds into one conscious network. Would we even recognize them as alive in the way we understand life? Or would they seem like something else entirely, a new kind of organism stretching across a world? This is where the thought experiment becomes personal. Ask yourself, if humanity's survival required giving up individuality, would you accept it? Would you merge your will into something greater, knowing that your unique perspective might dissolve into the collective? Or would you resist, even if resistance meant extinction? There is no easy answer. For some, the survival of the species would justify any sacrifice. For others, Existence without freedom is no existence at all. Perhaps this is why so many civilizations do not make it. The transition from competitive tribes to unified planet is not just a political challenge, but an existential one. It demands that a species redefine what it means to be alive, to think, to choose. Most may fail because the pull of individuality is too strong, the distrust too deep, the sacrifice is too unbearable. But maybe in a few rare places the transformation occurs, and those civilizations, quiet and enduring, may look out into the stars with patience, watching younger worlds wrestle with the same impossible decision. If this is the case, then the silence we hear in the cosmos may be more profound than we think. It is not the silence of absence, but the silence of transformation. Civilizations may not have disappeared, but they may have become so different from us that they no longer seek communication in ways we can recognize. A hive mind that thinks as a planet might not feel the need to send messages across the stars. It may be content in its own harmony turned inward, its energy devoted to sustaining the balance of its world. To us, this would look like emptiness, but to them it might feel like fullness beyond our comprehension. And here lies the haunting possibility. If we ever encounter alien life, it may not resemble individuals at all. It may not speak to us as one being to another, but as a chorus speaking in unison, or as an intelligence so integrated we cannot tell where one mind ends and another begins. They may not value conversation in the way we do, because conversation assumes separation. And in their reality, separation no longer exists. To them we might seem fractured, confused, even primitive, like neurons refusing to connect into a brain. Still, we must not dismiss this vision too quickly. Collective intelligence does not necessarily mean uniformity. Just as a brain contains regions with specialized functions, a planetary mind might still allow diversity within unity. Creativity could survive, but channeled through a structure that ensures survival first. Freedom might exist, but reframed as participation in the health of the whole. Perhaps the most advanced civilizations find a way to keep individuality alive, but woven into a web so tightly that no single thread can unravel the entire fabric. So when we wonder why the stars are quiet, we should consider this: maybe the civilizations that endure do not vanish, and they do not fall silent because they are gone. Maybe they become something else, something unrecognizable to us, something that no longer shares our restless need for expansion or our desperate desire for connection. Their voices may still be out there, but speaking in a language not made for us. And this raises the most uncomfortable question of all. If survival means becoming something other than human, is that a path we are willing to take? Or do we cling to individuality even if it carries us to extinction? The universe will not answer for us. The choice will be ours, and it may arrive sooner than we expect. For now, all we can do is imagine. Imagine the possibility of a world where the will of billions beats as one heart, where survival is guaranteed, but freedom is transformed, where intelligence does not destroy itself but transcends. If such civilizations exist, they may not look like us, think like us, or dream like us. And if we ever hope to join them among the stars, we must ask ourselves what price we are willing to pay to endure. What if the civilizations we seek have not vanished, but chosen silence? This is the unsettling premise of what many call the dark forest, an image as poetic as it is terrifying. Picture a vast forest at night, where countless creatures hide among the trees. Each is intelligent, each is armed, each is aware that the smallest sound could betray its position. No one dares to sing, no one dares to call out, because in this forest, to be heard is to be hunted. And so silence becomes not just a strategy, but survival itself. Applied to the cosmos, the metaphor becomes almost unbearable. Every star might host worlds, and some of those worlds might cradle life, and some of that life might bloom into civilizations. But instead of broadcasting greetings into the void, they keep their voices low, disguising their presence, careful not to reveal their coordinates. Because out there beyond the reach of their telescopes, another intelligence might be listening. And in a universe where resources are finite, where trust cannot be established across light years, the safest assumption is the darkest one, that anyone who hears you might destroy you. It is a chilling thought because it suggests the silence of the sky is not proof of emptiness, but of fear. Perhaps we have been listening into a cosmic library, where every book has chosen to remain closed, waiting, watching, but never speaking. Perhaps the quiet is deliberate, a pact of mutual invisibility maintained not through agreement, but through shared dread. If so, our own attempts to send signals into space take on a more ominous light. We imagine ourselves reaching out, offering friendship to the stars, but in the logic of the dark forest, those signals could just as easily be flares announcing our position to predators. Think about what this would mean for a civilization that had already reached this conclusion. For them, silence would not be passive, it would be an active discipline. They would dismantle their radio transmitters, encrypt every leak of electromagnetic radiation, even consider reshaping their planetary environment to appear more barren to distant eyes. Their entire technological growth would not be aimed at shining brighter, but at becoming invisible. To exist would mean to hide. To thrive would mean to erase every sign of thriving. What does it do to a people to know that the greatest threat is not their own self-destruction but discovery by others? And yet in this silence lies a peculiar kind of tragedy. A civilization that chooses invisibility is one that chooses isolation. They may master their world, stabilize their societies, even build wonders that would leave us breathless, but all of it would remain hidden, unshared, unseen. Imagine a people who long to know if they are alone, who build instruments to search the stars, but who also know that sending a single signal could spell their end. The yearning for connection would never die, but it would have to be smothered, replaced by a vigilance that never fades. Their greatest dream to meet another mind becomes their greatest danger. If this is true, then the universe may be far lonelier than it appears. Not because we are the only voices, but because the other voices have chosen not to speak. And the irony is painful. The silence meant to protect life only deepens the illusion of emptiness. Each world becomes an island locked in a vast ocean, convinced that beyond the horizon lurk predators unwilling to risk a voyage that might end in annihilation. From our perspective, it looks like nothing is there. From theirs, everything is there, but no one dares to move. Of course, the dark forest is still a theory, a haunting story we tell ourselves to explain the silence. But it carries a logic difficult to dismiss. In human history, we already see patterns that echo it. When tribes met in a landscape where resources were scarce and no trust had been established, encounters often ended in violence. Those who survived learned to remain hidden, to keep their fires low at night, to stay silent when danger was near. Why should the universe be any different? Scale it up to galactic distances and the stakes become infinitely higher. A single careless broadcast could invite destruction centuries or millennia later, but it would still come as inevitable as the footsteps in a dark wood. And here perhaps we stumble upon a mirror, because right now, humanity stands at a strange crossroads. On one hand, we are reaching further into the cosmos than ever before, building telescopes that can glimpse planets circling distant suns. On the other, we have already begun sending signals, greetings etched into radio waves, plaques attached to spacecraft, golden records carrying our music and images into the dark. We do this with the hope that someone somewhere will find them. But if the dark forest is real, then we are not whispering into the night, we are shouting, and others may be listening with ears sharper than ours. Would you still send a signal knowing it might paint a target on Earth? Would you still light a fire in the forest hoping it attracts a friend when it might just as easily attract a hunter? These are not just hypothetical questions. They are choices we must make perhaps sooner than we think. And each choice forces us to ask what matters more, the longing for connection or the instinct for survival. Perhaps in the end, this is the cruelest filter of all. Not the destruction of civilizations through war or physics, but the self-imposed silence of fear. A silence so perfect that it makes the universe look empty, when in truth it may be filled with watchful eyes. Civilizations that endure may not vanish. They may simply become ghosts, present but undetectable, alive but unreachable. They survive by binding themselves in secrecy, and in doing so erase the possibility of being known. So when you look up at the night sky and see only silence, consider that it might not be silence at all. It might be the quiet breathing of countless civilizations holding their breath, unwilling to be the first to speak. And then consider where we stand. Will we keep sending our voices into the void, trusting that strangers across the stars will greet us with kindness? Or will we one day fall into the same silence, dimming our signals, hiding our presence, becoming ghosts ourselves? The stars are waiting, but perhaps not in the way we dream. Perhaps they are not barren, but crowded with listeners who dare not answer. Perhaps the emptiness is only a mask worn by fear. And if that is true, then the great paradox of existence is not that we are alone, but that we are surrounded, and yet destined never to meet. What if the silence of the universe is not emptiness at all, but aftermath? Not the sound of nothing, but the echo of everything that has already burned away. Imagine for a moment that the cosmos is not a stage awaiting its first players, but a graveyard vast and eternal, where millions of civilizations once flickered into being and then vanished without a trace. They might have built cities, mapped their skies, written poetry, laughed, despaired, dreamed of stars, and now all of it is gone. The silence we hear is not their absence, but their extinction. It is a haunting picture. We turn our antennas outward, scanning the skies for signals, and nothing answers. But perhaps the reason is simple and brutal. The voices we long for have already spoken long ago, but no one is left to continue the conversation. Their transmitters went silent, not because they chose to, but because their worlds fell into ruin, their suns grew harsh, their wars consumed them, or their ambitions outpaced their wisdom. Signals may indeed have once been sent scattered like seeds into the void, but by the time they reach us, their senders have already crumbled to dust. Think of it like looking at the ruins of an ancient city buried beneath sand. Once it was full of life markets, bustling families, living rulers planning for futures that never came. Now it is silent. The stones remain, but the voices are gone. On Earth we can dig and discover their traces. In the universe, no archaeologist can reach across light years to uncover the remnants of a civilization long dead. Their monuments may still orbit their stars, but stripped of power, reduced to lifeless debris drifting endlessly. Their messages may still speed across the galaxy, but by the time they reach another listener, no one remains to answer back. This is perhaps the cruelest version of the paradox. The sky is not silent because intelligence is rare, but because intelligence is fragile. Every civilization is a candle burning in the dark, and though there may have been countless candles, each has been snuffed out in its time. Some by accident, some by violence, some by inevitability. The universe may be littered with the ashes of brilliance, an endless archive of lives once lived, but with no librarian left to guard them. It is not hard to imagine how this could happen. Stars flare, climates shift, asteroids strike. Civilizations rise, invent tools of immense power, and then stumble under the weight of their own creations. Perhaps some reached further colonized planets, maybe even whole systems, but even then time is relentless. Stars age, galaxies collide, entropy gnaws at everything. No empire, however vast, can outrun forever. And so one by one the voices go quiet. Not all at once, not in some grand catastrophe, but as a slow extinguishing that stretches across billions of years. By the time we arrive on the scene, the chorus has ended, and all that remains is silence. And yet silence can deceive. When we look at the night sky, we see it as timeless, serene, but it is not. What we see is history. Every star is an ancient message light sent ages ago. Some of those stars may already be gone, their light still crossing the gulf to us, telling a story of a present that no longer exists. If that is true of stars, why not civilizations? Perhaps we are receiving signals, even now faint whispers buried in cosmic noise, but their senders are already extinct. We listen for greetings, not realizing we may be eavesdropping on ghosts. There is a sobering intimacy to this thought, because if the universe is a graveyard of minds, then we here on Earth are not spectators, we are participants. Our species is one more candle burning, one more fragile experiment, To realize that countless others have tried and failed before us is not only humbling, it is terrifying. We do not know what killed them, but the fact that we are still here means we may yet face the same fates. Their absence is not just mystery, it is warning. But warnings can also be gifts. If indeed the universe is strewn with the remnants of civilizations, then our very existence is extraordinary. Against all odds here, we are alive, aware, standing at the edge of the graveyard and looking out into the silence. If every other flame has gone out, then our flame is precious beyond measure. And that realization should not paralyze us with fear, but sharpen us with clarity. It tells us that survival is not inevitable, that wisdom must outpace destruction, that the stories of those who came before, though we cannot read them, must not be repeated by us. Ask yourself, what does it mean to live in a universe like this? A universe that may not be empty but haunted. If every civilization eventually falls, then perhaps the measure of intelligence is not how far we reach, but how long we endure. Perhaps the true triumph is not in broadcasting our presence across galaxies, but in ensuring that centuries from now, there is still someone here to listen. In that sense, every decision we make matters not just for us, but for the possibility that intelligence can survive at all. There is something strangely beautiful, too, in this vision of a graveyard cosmos. Not beautiful in a comforting sense, but in the way a ruin can be beautiful, an elegy written in stone. To think that intelligence has flared again and again across time and space, that we are not the first dreamers to lift our eyes to the stars, is to feel connected to something vast. We may never meet them, we may never know their names or stories, but to imagine them is to give them a kind of second life. In remembering the possibility of their existence, we honor them, and perhaps that is the role we have been given standing here at the threshold of knowledge. We cannot resurrect the civilizations that may have been, but we can learn from their silence. We can choose not to burn ourselves out, as they did to turn this fragile spark of ours into something more enduring. To do so requires humility, foresight, and a recognition that we are not just living for ourselves, but for the continuation of the very idea of intelligence. So when we look into the night sky and hear nothing, let us not mistake it for emptiness. Let us instead hear the weight of all that has come before the echoes of countless civilizations that tried and fell. The silence is not void, it is memory. And within that memory lies both warning and hope, because unlike the dead, we are still here. We still have choices to make, paths to take, futures to build. The graveyard of knowledge may stretch across the stars, but we are not yet among its tombstones. We stand at the crossroads, aware of the darkness, aware of the silence, and aware, too, of the fragile miracle of our own survival. What happens next depends on us. Will we become another forgotten whisper? Another ghostly signal fading into the void? Or will we be the exception, the voice that endures, the flame that refuses to go out, the civilization that turns the graveyard into a garden once more? What if, when we gaze into the silence of the universe, we are not only searching for others but also glimpsing our own reflection? The empty skies may not simply be a riddle about distant civilizations, but a mirror, showing us what could happen if we are not careful. It is unsettling, even frightening, to think that the great mystery of the cosmos might not be about them at all, but about us. In the silence, perhaps we are seeing our own potential future, the shadow of our destiny written across the stars. Humanity now stands at a threshold unlike any it has faced before. For most of our history, we lived precariously, surviving droughts, plagues, wars, and the fragile balance of nature. The dangers were immense, but they were mostly external, beyond our control. Today, however, the most powerful threats to our survival are not out there lurking in the cosmos or waiting in the natural world. They are in our own hands, born from our own brilliance. We are the first species on Earth to wield tools capable of erasing ourselves. Nuclear weapons can obliterate cities in seconds. Artificial intelligence, if misaligned or uncontrolled, could make decisions beyond our comprehension or strip us of agency. Biotechnology, while promising cures for disease, can also create plagues engineered with precision. These are not distant possibilities or abstract fears, they are here now, resting within reach. They are blades we hold by the handle, but also by the edge. Tools of creation and destruction at once, they are our greatest opportunity and our greatest danger. In this light, humanity itself becomes the experiment, the living embodiment of the great filter hypothesis. We wonder why no one else is out there, why the universe is so quiet. And perhaps the answer is simple. Every civilization, upon reaching a stage like ours, creates powers it cannot fully control. Some survive, some do not. Most perhaps do not. And we right now are in the middle of that test. We are the data point in progress, not yet resolved, still hanging in the balance. It is tempting to believe that progress guarantees survival, that intelligence itself is enough, but history teaches otherwise. Intelligence alone is not wisdom, power alone is not safety. Civilizations rise and fall, often undone not by lack of knowledge, but by lack of foresight, by short-term greed, by the inability to act as one when it mattered most. If we look at ourselves honestly, do we not see the same patterns? Political rivalries, divisions, competition for resources, mistrust of one another. In a world more interconnected than ever, these fractures are not smaller but more dangerous. And yet there is something different about this moment. For the first time, our actions as a species directly determine whether we pass through the filter or fail it. We cannot blame the stars or fate or the randomness of nature. The responsibility is ours. Every choice we make as a collective pushes us closer to one side of the scale or the other. That realization is both terrifying and empowering. Terrifying because the stakes are extinction. Empowering because, unlike the civilizations that may have vanished before us, we know what is at risk. We can see the mirror, and we can decide whether to step away from the edge. Pause for a moment and imagine the future stretching out before us in two directions. In one, humanity destroys itself, whether through war, environmental collapse, or runaway technologies. Our cities crumble, our voices vanish, and the earth grows quiet again. Just another planet with ruins, perhaps one day to be studied by whoever comes after. In the other future, humanity endures, learns, matures. We master our tools without being consumed by them. We use power responsibly, and we spread beyond our fragile cradle. One future ends in silence, the other in song. Both are possible. The question is which one we will choose. There is something deeply personal in this, because you and I are not just observers of humanity's story, we are participants. Every invention, every policy, every cultural shift is shaped not by abstract forces, but by individuals acting together. When we say humanity faces a choice, what we mean is that each of us faces a choice. To prioritize long-term survival over short-term gain. To demand accountability for technologies that could change the world forever. To act not just for ourselves, but for generations we will never meet. This is where the mirror becomes sharpest, because in the silence of the universe, we may be seeing our own warning. Perhaps every civilization that reached this stage thought they had more time, that they could handle their power, that their divisions were manageable. Perhaps they delayed, argued, ignored the dangers until it was too late, and so their voices went silent. The question is, will we repeat their mistakes, or will we learn from an absence that may already be their epitaph? It is easy to feel overwhelmed, to think the problems are too vast for any one person to affect. But that is only true if we all accept it. Change has never come from indifference, but from persistence. You may not control nuclear treaties, or the design of artificial intelligence, or the global use of biotechnology, but you do control how you think, how you act, how you speak about these things. You shape the culture that shapes the leaders who make those decisions. You are part of the experiment too, whether you like it or not. The silence of the stars is not just a cosmic mystery, it is a challenge. It asks us, will you be the exception? Will you be the one who refuses to vanish into the graveyard of civilizations? Will you use your intelligence not merely to invent but to preserve? These are not questions for some distant generation. They are for us now because the window of decision is open now. And so as we look into the mirror of the cosmos, let us not be paralyzed by fear, but motivated by it. Fear can destroy, but it can also focus. It reminds us of what is precious, what is worth protecting. Humanity is still young, still learning, but we are not helpless. We have the ability to imagine the worst and prevent it to see the shadow of our future and choose another path. That is our greatest advantage, and perhaps the only thing that separates us from the civilizations that may have already failed. If the stars are a graveyard, then let us be the ghosts who refuse to lie down. If the silence is a warning, then let us answer it with determination. The story of humanity is still being written, and the mirror of the universe shows us only possibilities, not certainties. The future is not decided yet, and maybe, just maybe, that is our greatest hope. Perhaps survival is not about extinguishing the fire, but about learning how to live beside it without letting it consume everything. Humanity has always played with dangerous forces from the moment our ancestors tamed flames to cook food and light the night. Fire in its raw state can burn forests, destroy homes, and kill without mercy. But contained, it became the foundation of civilization, powering engines, forging tools, and shaping the world into what we know today. The story of survival has never been about eliminating danger entirely, but about holding it steady, containing its chaos within boundaries that allow creation instead of destruction. The same truth echoes in our modern world, only now the fires we hold are infinitely brighter and more destructive. Nuclear weapons can wipe out entire nations. Artificial intelligence can think faster than we do and operate in ways beyond our comprehension. Biotechnology can alter life itself at a molecular level. These are not distant possibilities, they are already here, glowing embers in our hands, each one capable of turning into an inferno. The question is not whether we can put them away forever, because history suggests we cannot. Once humanity invents something, it rarely disappears. Knowledge once discovered has a way of lingering. The real question is whether we can manage these powers responsibly, the way we once learned to carry torches without burning down the forest. History gives us reasons to believe that control, though fragile, is possible. After the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the world stepped back in shock at its own capacity for destruction. Out of that shock emerged treaties, negotiations, and limitations. Imperfect though they were, nations signed agreements to reduce nuclear stockpiles, to prevent testing, to minimize the risk of total annihilation. These efforts did not eliminate the danger, but they showed something important: humanity can recognize a threat and collectively act to restrain it. It was not a solution, but it was a survival instinct, manifest on a global scale. The same has happened in science. Laboratories around the world operate under strict safety protocols, not only to protect their workers, but to prevent catastrophic accidents from spilling into society. When genetic engineering, advanced regulations were created to prevent misuse. When artificial intelligence began showing its immense potential, discussions began almost immediately about ethics, alignment, and oversight. These are still early steps, shaky and uneven, but they reveal an awareness that we cannot play recklessly with the fire we have made. There is recognition, even if incomplete, that survival depends on restraint as much as on ambition. And yet it is worth asking, are these measures enough? Treaties can be broken, protocols can fail, rules can be bent, ignored, or exploited. Human history is also filled with moments where agreements were cast aside in the name of greed, power, or desperation. To imagine survival only through regulation is to underestimate the scale of the challenge. Fire does not care about laws written on paper. It obeys only those who truly respect its nature. And so for humanity to survive its own inventions, more than rules may be required. A deeper cultural transformation may be necessary, one that shifts how we see ourselves, our power, and our responsibilities. Perhaps what we need is not just management of danger, but maturity as a species. Maturity means understanding not only what we can do, but what we should do. It means recognizing that survival is not secured by individuals alone, but by collective discipline. If we treat nuclear weapons, AI, or biotechnology as tools to outcompete one another, to dominate rivals, or to seek short-term advantage, we will only fuel the fire until it burns out of control. But if we treat them as shared responsibilities, as powers so great that they demand cooperation above all else, then perhaps we have a chance to hold them safely. Think of it this way. Every invention humanity has ever created is a kind of flame. Some small, like the wheel or the compass. Some enormous, like electricity or the internet. But these modern flames, those capable of erasing us, require something we have never fully achieved before: global trust. For the first time, our survival does not hinge on the wisdom of one tribe, one nation, or one empire. It depends on the ability of billions of people to act as one, to respect the same boundaries, to protect the same fragile future. This is a responsibility that feels overwhelming, but it is the reality of the moment we live in. You and I are not separate from this process. Every time we participate in conversations about technology, every time we vote, every time we question the motives of those in power, we contribute to the culture of restraint or recklessness. It may feel small, almost insignificant, but the collective is built from individuals who choose not to look away. If we all dismiss these concerns as someone else's problem, then the fire will spread unchecked. If enough of us take them seriously, however, then restraint becomes real, embedded in the very way humanity thinks about progress. But this raises the question, can restraint alone keep us safe forever? Or will the fire, no matter how carefully contained, eventually escape? It is possible that survival requires not only rules and maturity, but a deeper reimagining of how humanity defines progress itself. For centuries, progress has meant bigger, faster, stronger, more energy, more power, more reach. Perhaps the next stage of progress is not about more, but about wiser. It may be that survival in the long run depends not on what we build, but on what we choose not to build. Not on the fires we ignite, but on the fires we refuse to spark. That idea is uncomfortable, even radical. It asks us to imagine a future where restraint is not seen as weakness, but as strength, where humanity takes pride not only in its capacity to create, but in its ability to say no, to pause, to question. The civilizations that may have vanished before us might have failed because they never reached that stage of wisdom. They may have built endlessly, raced endlessly, until their fire consumed them. If we can learn to be different, to respect the flames without letting them spread, then perhaps we can succeed where they did not. This then is the challenge before us. Not to extinguish the fire of human invention that would be impossible and perhaps undesirable, but to live with it carefully, deliberately, and with humility. To learn how to walk beside it without being burned. It is a challenge that requires rules and protocols, yes, but also something deeper. A change in the way we see ourselves and our place in the cosmos. If we can make that shift, then the silence of the stars need not be our reflection. It can remain only a mystery while we continue to write our story here, and maybe one day beyond. But if we fail, if we treat our powers as toys, if we allow recklessness to override restraint, then the fire will consume us as surely as it has consumed countless others. The silence of the universe will grow heavier, and we will join the graveyard of civilizations who could not master their own creations. The choice is ours, and it is unfolding now in our generation, in our lifetime. So perhaps survival is not about extinguishing the flame. Perhaps it is about learning how to hold it with steady hands, to pass it from one generation to the next, without letting it slip, without letting it ignite the world around us. That is the task of humanity, the delicate balance between creation and destruction, the eternal test written into the very fabric of progress. And as long as the flame still burns, there remains hope that we can keep it alive, not as a force of ruin, but as a light guiding us forward. If intelligent life is doomed to destroy itself, then what is the meaning of it all? That question is more than science. It is philosophy wrapped in the language of survival. Every attempt to explain the silence of the stars eventually bends toward this deeper mystery. It is not only about probabilities, technologies, or cosmic hazards. It is about whether intelligence, the very thing that allows us to ask these questions, contains within itself the seeds of its own undoing. One way to look at it is to imagine knowledge as a flame endlessly hungry, forever consuming. Each discovery leads to another, each invention opens new possibilities, and each possibility holds within it the chance of ruin. Fire cooks our food, warms our homes, powers our engines, and lights our cities. But fire also burns down forests, destroys lives, and leaves only ash behind. What if intelligence, like fire, always tends toward consuming itself? What if the end of every civilization is already encoded in its curiosity, in its restless drive, to know more, build more, and stretch further than wisdom can reach? But there is another possibility. What if intelligence exists not to consume itself, but to overcome itself, to struggle against its own destructive instincts, and in that struggle find meaning? From this view, the purpose of knowledge is not destruction, but transcendence. The real test of a civilization is not how much it can build or how far it can travel, but whether it can master its own shadows. Perhaps intelligence was never meant to be a safe gift. Perhaps it was always meant to be dangerous, a double-edged sword, a challenge handed to any species that dared to rise above instinct. In this light, the silence of the cosmos may not be a tomb, but a mirror. Maybe it reflects all the civilizations that tried and failed, and in their failure left behind no voice, no message, no light. But maybe, just maybe, it also reflects the opportunity before us, the possibility that we could be the first to succeed. If so, then our existence is not meaningless, but burdened with responsibility. We are not merely another animal, another culture, another temporary flicker in cosmic history. We are participants in a universal question, one asked by countless others before us, one that has so far received only silence as an answer. And that question is simple: can intelligence endure? It is tempting to think of this as an abstract riddle, something philosophers debate in classrooms or writers explore in novels. But it is not abstract. It is painfully real. Every nuclear arsenal, every algorithm growing beyond its creators, every experiment with biology that carries both cure and curse, these are the ways the question appears in our daily lives. The test is not waiting for us in the future. It is happening now, in the choices we make, in the systems we build, in the risks we tolerate, and in the futures we imagine. The meaning of intelligence may lie in how it faces this test. If every species fails, then perhaps meaning is not found in survival, but in the attempt itself. There is dignity in the struggle, in the effort to push against the inevitability of destruction, even if the odds are cruel. Imagine a civilization knowing it may fail, but choosing to reach anyway, to build, to explore, to create art, to love, to wonder at the stars. Is that not a kind of meaning, even if it ends in silence? Perhaps the universe is not asking us to survive forever, but to show what we can become while we last. Yet for many, that answer is unsatisfying. To accept destruction as inevitable feels like surrender, and humanity is not a species that surrenders easily. We dream not only of surviving for a while, but of enduring, of stretching beyond the lifespan of stars, of carrying life into the farthest reaches of time. For us, meaning is found not just in the struggle, but in the possibility of victory. And so we look at the silence of the stars and wonder if it is a warning or an invitation. Are we meant to fall like all the rest? Or are we meant to break the cycle and prove that intelligence can in fact last? This tension between inevitability and possibility is what makes the question so profound. It is not just science. It is not just philosophy. It is something that cuts into our personal lives. Because when we ask, what is the meaning of intelligence if it destroys itself, we are also asking, what is the meaning of my life, my choices, my brief moment of awareness? If civilizations can vanish so easily, what do our own struggles matter? And yet if civilizations can endure, then perhaps even the smallest choices ripple into eternity. You might feel a strange weight when thinking about this. I do too. Because suddenly the silence of space is no longer distant. It is here, pressing against our imagination, forcing us to look inward. It makes us ask whether our inventions are tools of survival or traps we are building for ourselves. It makes us ask whether progress is something to chase without question or something to hold with care. And it makes us ask what it really means to be alive, to be conscious, to be aware that we are mortal, fragile, and yet capable of shaping the future. Some might say that the very act of asking these questions is itself the meaning. No other creature, as far as we know, can step outside of its instincts and reflect on its own existence with such clarity. No other creature writes philosophies, builds telescopes, or worries about the fate of the cosmos. That alone sets us apart. Perhaps intelligence was never meant to be safe, but it was meant to be aware, to wrestle with paradoxes, to feel both wonder and fear, and to transform that tension into action. And that leads to the most pressing point of all. At some level, meaning is not given. It is chosen. If intelligence carries within it the risk of self-destruction, then our role is to decide what to do with that risk. Do we treat it as a curse, a reason to despair, to give up, to chase pleasure until the end? Or do we treat it as a challenge, a call to rise, a demand to be wiser than those who may have come before? The choice is not abstract. It is as real as the next decision we make as a civilization. So perhaps the meaning of intelligence is not fixed, not carved into the fabric of the universe. Perhaps it is something we create through our response to the silence, through our attempts to endure, through our refusal to accept inevitability without a fight. In that way, meaning is not what we find at the end of the journey, but what we write along the way. And when you look up at the night sky, into that ocean of emptiness, perhaps you can feel it too. The stars are silent, yes, but their silence is not void of meaning. It is filled with questions, with echoes, with the possibility of awakening. And in the end, it all comes down to us, to you, to me, to all of us. Together choosing whether intelligence is merely a fire that burns itself out or a light that learns how to endure. Because at its core, it all collapses into a single decision. A choice so simple and so vast it feels almost unbearable. Will we let our intelligence consume us, as perhaps it has consumed countless others? Or will we use it to rise, to endure, and to finally answer the silence with something more? What if the silence of the universe is not a warning but an equal to invitation? That thought alone is enough to turn despair into possibility. For so long, humanity has stared into the dark, listening, waiting, hoping for a whisper from beyond. The empty skies have often been taken as proof of doom, as evidence that life always collapses before it can truly spread. Yet another way to see it is this, perhaps. The silence is not because the universe has nothing to say, but because it is waiting for us to speak. The quiet out there becomes less a void and more a mirror. When we hear nothing, we are forced to confront the only voice we have, our own. The stars shine, but they do not speak. The galaxies swirl, but they do not sing. The silence presses us inward until we realize that the question we have been asking, where is everyone, is also a question about ourselves. If we are not hearing anyone else, maybe it is not because they never existed, but because they no longer exist. Maybe through chance, luck, or stubborn resilience, we are among the few who have survived long enough to reach this threshold of awareness. Think of that for a moment. Out of the billions of stars and the countless worlds that may have hosted life, what if we are standing on one of the rarest stages in the cosmos? One of the very few places where intelligence has not yet extinguished itself. That realization does not shrink us. It enlarges us. Suddenly, the silence is not a curse. It is an opportunity. If no other voices echo in the void, then perhaps we are meant to be the ones who speak, who create the first lasting sound, the first enduring signal that will outlive not just us, but the very stars that burn above us. But here lies the weight. If we are among the few still alive, then we carry a responsibility far greater than survival alone. It is not enough to simply continue. To exist in silence is to vanish like all the others. To exist with voice, with meaning, with purpose, is to become something more. Perhaps the universe does not need another echo of destruction. Perhaps it needs a story that breaks the pattern. a species that chooses not to follow the well-worn path into silence. This is where the invitation becomes clear. The stillness of space is like a stage vast and waiting. We are the actors stepping onto it, our voices trembling, uncertain yet filled with potential. No script has been written for us. And maybe that is the point. If countless civilizations have already written their scripts and burned them to ash, then ours may still be unwritten. A story with the chance to unfold differently. And in that unfolding, we might become the voice the cosmos has been waiting to hear. You can feel it when you look at the night sky. It is not just beautiful, it is demanding. Those points of light are not passive ornaments but ancient watchers. They remind us that time is vast, that life is fragile, and that meaning is not handed to us. It must be created. To hear nothing in return is not to be abandoned, but to be called upon. We are asked in the most profound silence imaginable whether we will rise and speak or remain quiet and fade, like all the rest. It may feel overwhelming, but perhaps the truth is that humanity has always been preparing for this role. We tell stories, we pass knowledge, we sing songs, we build monuments, we write in books and carve into stone, all because we do not want to vanish into silence. Every culture in history has understood this instinctively. The silence of the universe only magnifies it. Now it is no longer about leaving traces for our children or for our species, but for the universe itself. We are not simply writing history, we are writing existence into the cosmic record. What does it mean then to be the voice rather than the echo? It means we cannot settle for survival without vision. We cannot exist only to avoid destruction. We must also aim to create, to endure, to project meaning into the dark. This is not about arrogance, about declaring ourselves masters of the cosmos. It is about humility, about recognizing that in the silence of the universe, every word we speak, every action we take, every survival we achieve, may be one of the only voices that will ever exist. That is a staggering gift. And it is also a staggering burden. I want you to imagine just for a second what it would mean if our species were the exception. If we were the ones who learned to outlast the fragility that destroyed others. If we built not only weapons but wisdom, not only machines but compassion. If we spread not only across planets but across time, leaving behind signals, structures, ideas and echoes that would endure long after Earth itself was gone. Imagine the silence breaking. Not with chaos, not with noise, but with a single enduring voice. Ours reaching outward for millennia, maybe for eternity. Would that not be worth the struggle? The silence of the universe may terrify us, but it also liberates us. It tells us that the future is not yet decided. If others have fallen, it does not mean we must. If others are gone, it does not mean we cannot remain. The silence is not a cage, it is an open door. Beyond it is possibility, and the only question that remains is whether we will step through. So in the end, the silence does not ask us whether we will be destroyed. That question is too small. Destruction is always a possibility for every star, every world, every life. The real question is whether we dare to go against the destiny that seems to have swallowed the rest. Whether we will accept the silence as final, or whether we will answer it with something new. And that leaves us here, standing at the edge of the cosmos with a choice. The choice to vanish quietly, to add our names to the list of forgotten civilizations, or to rise, to endure, to become the exception. Because in the end, the question is not whether humanity will be destroyed. The question is whether we dare to break the silence, to carry our fragile light into the endless dark, and to become the one voice in the universe that refuses to fade.